Welcome to the Power in Motion podcast, the show for women who want to develop a kinder relationship with their body so you can feel healthy, happy, and confident without restricting food, doing torturous exercise, or constantly worrying about the number on the scale. I'm your host, Kim Hagel, size-inclusive fitness specialist and certified non-diet health and life coach specializing in body image. This podcast is here to provide weight-neutral, health at every size aligned information and coaching on sustainable habits and mindset shifts so you can feel your very best in the body you have right now. Let's lace up our runners and go for a walk while we chat. Well, hello, friends, and welcome back. This is episode 69 of the Joyful Movement Show, and I'm your host, Kim Hagel. And today is part 3 of a 4-part series that we're doing all about debunking the myths around weight and health. Now, if you have been following the show for a while, you know that I'm anti-diet and I don't promote intentional weight loss as a means to get healthier because, one, there's no way to lose weight that's been proven to work long term. We know that 95% of all diets or weight loss attempts will result in the weight, and usually more of it, being regained in 1 to 5 years. And 2, health and weight are just not the same thing, and there's no definitive research that shows that achieving a certain BMI alone will improve your health. So really, we're barking up the wrong tree when we cite getting healthy as a reason to want to lose weight, where in fact it's our habits, the things that we do that are within our control that have the most profound effect on our health, not simply losing weight in isolation. And yet there's so much misinformation out there about health and weight that can really make it seem like weight loss is the answer. I get this. I hear the same stuff that you do every day, right? And it seems like, especially for certain health conditions, diet culture does a really great job of convincing us that weight loss is the one and only way to feel better. So I wanted to explore some of those topics here on the show with experts to help unpack whether that's true, or why we're taught to believe this in the first place, or is there more to the story, or another way that we can look at things, other ways that we can feel better and improve our health without the obsession over weight loss. So last week we talked about joint pain and weight, which is a very common topic that I hear in my practice. So if you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to that one after this. But today we're talking about midlife. And I'm excited about this one. If you are like me and you're over the age of 40, or maybe even you're not quite 40 yet, you might have noticed there's some changes happening in your body, both in your body composition and maybe also in your skin and your hair, maybe your energy levels, mood, memory, sleep. I know for me, sleep was the first thing that I noticed, and it didn't hit me that it could be the beginnings of perimenopause until I started talking about what I was experiencing to more friends. I just thought I was stressed or needed more rest or something was going on. And that's the crazy thing that I learned is it caught me completely off guard that I could be in perimenopause. And that's something that our guest today talks about, is how 50% of women are surprised to learn that they're in perimenopause. There's just not enough discussion about this. No one's coming and teaching us a sex ed class like they did in elementary school when we went through puberty. We're kind of left to flounder and figure this all out on our own. And if you do go looking for advice like I did, most of what you're going to find is about losing the menopause pooch and centers around cutting carbs, which I think just preys on the insecurities of women and accentuates body image concerns and really doesn't do a whole lot to help us feel better during this time of life. So if your experience with this sounds similar to mine, I know you're going to love our guest today. Dr. Jenn Salib-Huber is a Canadian registered dietitian and naturopathic doctor and intuitive eating coach, and she's on a mission to help women thrive in midlife. She helps women navigate the physical and emotional changes that happen in perimenopause and menopause, including their search for food freedom and body confidence. Working from a health at every size approach, Jenn teaches women to become intuitive eaters and build body confidence at any stage in midlife. And I'm telling you, this was such a refreshing and practical conversation. I know I learned so much in talking to Jenn. So we chatted all about why most of the mainstream advice about midlife focuses on weight loss and how this really misses the point, how to take the focus off of feeling better about your body to feeling better in your body, why it's so important to stop using weight as a proxy for health, and how to actually improve your health by focusing on the things that you can control, why nutrition matters, but not in the way that we've been led to believe, why restricting carbohydrates is not necessary to feel better in midlife or ever for that matter. We talked about how we can stop dieting without feeling like we've let ourselves go. And then we chatted about how joyful movement can be a great support to our physical, mental, and emotional well-being during midlife. There is just so much good stuff in this episode. So without any further ado, let's dive into the interview. Well, Jenn Huber, welcome to the Joyful Movement Show. I am so looking forward to this conversation, maybe for my own selfish reasons, but I know that it's something that's going to resonate with many of our listeners here. We were talking off air before I started recording about how there's no what to expect in perimenopause book. And being at that stage of life myself, I started experiencing some things, some changes, and, went looking for advice, and everything is, well, cut out carbs, lose weight. And I was like, well, that doesn't work for me. Like, I'm not aligned with that. Like, that's just triggers all of that disordered eating and exercise stuff that I've worked so hard to overcome. And somehow in there, I came across your account, and it was this breath of fresh air. And you're the only person I know of who's talking about this stage of life in this way. So I'm very, very excited to dig in and debunk a bunch of those myths around midlife. So welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here. I always love talking with fellow non-diet, practitioners, and especially when I get to talk about midlife, which is my favorite topic.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you get us started by just telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be working in this niche, and why you do the work that you do.
I'd love to. So I have been a registered dietitian now for 22 years and a naturopathic doctor for coming up on 18. I have to count. And so for the first, I'd say half of my practice, the first decade or so, I had a really traditional, what I'd consider like a general family practice where I saw people in all ages and stages of life, and nutrition was very much a cornerstone of what I did. But I was still very much operating from that traditional perspective around nutrition and nutrients and calories. And as I kind of got into the practice of it, I realized that it wasn't exactly as I had been led to believe it was. And that was also my personal experience. And, somewhere probably close to a decade ago now, I started to see a lot more women in midlife who were, coming into my practice. And as it happened, I also was going into perimenopause early, but I didn't quite know that yet. And so I was 37. I had 3 young kids. I was tired. I was running a business, and all the things that I was experiencing were just chalked up to the fact that I was busy. I had young kids. I wasn't sleeping. I had too much stress. And, it took a couple of years, I think, for everyone to really put the pieces together. And so somewhere kind of, 38, 39, I really realized that, okay, this is perimenopause, and this explains a whole lot of what's been going on. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, my practice was very much becoming a non-diet practice. I had recently, what I call, closed my practice to weight loss because I felt it was no longer ethical to prescribe it or to use it in my practice. Mm-hmm. And so probably, 4 or 5 years ago, I really thought this is an area that I want to focus on. Because I'm in this age and stage myself, and because I feel like I have a lot to bring to this non-diet conversation, I really wanted to bring that conversation to midlife because, as you know, so many of the conversations that happen are around weight loss and losing weight, and really using weight as a proxy for health. And I feel pretty strongly that that's not the right conversation for us to be having, at least on the main stage.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And there's so many parts of that that I want to dig into. I guess my first question is, why is all of the advice around managing the symptoms that we experience in midlife, why is it so focused on weight loss?
Well, I think that there's two things that are happening. I think that weight as a health recommendation, so making weight a proxy for health, is something that is not unique to midlife and menopause health and nutrition.
Definitely not.
But because 80% of women, over 40 and in perimenopause experience weight and body changes, it is a conversation that comes up a lot. And it's coming up in conversations with primary care providers. It comes up in conversations with your friends, at book club. It comes up in conversations with, anybody who might have an opinion about it. And recommending weight loss, I think, is an easy recommendation, even though it's not evidence-based and even though it's not likely to work. So, and I think that that also intersects with, we know that there's another peak of body image dissatisfaction that happens in midlife. And so you have a changing body, maybe combined with a very long history of trying to control your shape and size with diet and exercise, combined with a change in what I call the hormonal soup that makes you feel like you're an uncomfortable teenager getting dressed in the morning, and all of a sudden your clothes aren't fitting the way you want to, and you get angry because things are kind of, poking out in a way that doesn't feel comfortable, and what you see in the mirror isn't what you expect to see. And all of that is the perfect storm. And there's a lot of, I think, diet culture that preys on that, knowing that women will do anything, quote unquote, do anything to, reverse that or change it or prevent it. Even though we don't have any evidence that there really is any diet or particular way of eating that's going to be more effective or effective at all in achieving and maintaining that.
Yeah. So it's almost like the weight gain that you said 80% of women experience is seen as the cause of all of our midlife problems, as opposed to a side effect of.
Well, I think it's a bit of both. I think that there is a recognition that some of the hormone changes that are happening, especially the change in estrogen, that does lead to a redistribution of assets, as I call it. And so, when you have that, let's say, pear shape, and, you have had that for most of your reproductive life, as many women do, not all by any means, but, by far, that's what we refer to as the gynoid distribution. It becomes more apple-like as we lose estrogen. And that's, that's a change that's pre-programmed into our DNA. We can't run from that. That's happening. And so even if the scale isn't changing, what your body looks like, how it fits into your clothes, all of that changes. But we don't tell women that. So kind of going back to what you said at the beginning about how we're not having the talk with women.
Yeah.
When I tell women that, they'll say, well, why didn't anyone tell me that? I would have been a whole lot kinder to myself if I had known that this was going to happen. Women will say, oh, I've spent 20 years trying to fight, this body shape because I saw this is what my mother and my grandmother ended up looking like. And I thought it was something I could prevent. When in reality, we need to shift our perspective around what we can control, because we can control the choices that influence our health, and we can control the choices that influence how we feel in our bodies, but that may or may not change what our bodies look like.
Yeah.
And until we can really pursue health independently of pursuing weight loss, it will always be the proxy for health. And that's where I think it's what I call the messy middle of doing this undieting work and this intuitive eating work, is that and I'm sure you see it all the time, that so many people say, I'm so done with dieting. I can't start another diet. Help me stop dieting, but I don't want to gain weight.
Yep.
I can't gain any more weight. And it would be really nice if I could lose some weight.
Yeah.
And so I use this story to I'm full of analogies, good and bad ones. Some are better than the others, but, I use this description of, like, let's say you sign up for a nature walk and you're really excited and you show up, and you have this guide and this group of people who are so excited to go on this nature walk, and you're going to look at all the plants and all the things. And at the beginning of the walk, the guide says, yeah, we're here for nature, but there are some hidden golden eggs along the path. You don't have to look for them if you don't want to, but I will give you hints as to where you might find them. So you spend the next 2 or 3 hours on this hike trying to stay focused on the nature, on the scenery, on the animals and the plants. But you notice everyone around you is like looking for the golden egg. When the leader says, oh, go down this path, look and see what's behind that bush, you feel compelled to try and find it. So even if you're there for the scenery, if you get to the end of that hike and you haven't found the golden egg, you're going to feel disappointed.
Yeah.
And so it's the same with why I tell people, like, intuitive eating is not anti-weight loss. It's not. It just doesn't support pursuing it as a goal. Because as soon as you think there's a possibility of finding it, just like the golden egg, you're going to be disappointed if you don't. So I think that for many people in midlife who have spent a lifetime trying to pursue a number, a size, that kind of body change through food and movement, it can feel really scary to just say, I'm not going to pursue that. And I'm just going to be open to the idea that I can be healthy and I can be happy, even if I don't achieve that size.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is scary, and it is hard to even fathom when, or if it's been your life's pursuit to try to change this body that you have. And now you're dealt with all these new changes. And, if your pattern has always been trying to become happier, healthier, more content, more successful, whatever, by losing weight. And now there's another layer on that. It seems even more daunting, I suppose.
And there's an urgency, I think, that comes with it in midlife, where women have heard stories from friends or older female relatives about how hard it is. And, you have to really get ahead of it, and you have to restrict more and do more. And so there's an urgency and a fear around it. And, I always say that I don't think we should ever make decisions out of fear. Those decisions will never be confident. They will never feel right, because when you're in that fear-based decision-making mode, you're not focused on feeling good in the moment. You're focused on preventing a theoretical threat.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so we've been programmed to believe that we can't be happy unless we get to, a size or a number, or that we can't be healthy. That's the other biggest thing, is that, when we'll say, okay, fine, I might be able to get to a place where I feel good in this, next size up or whatever, but I have to do it for my health.
Yeah.
Right. And, I think that, again, that comes back to, well, we're in control of the choices that we make that can influence health, but we're not in control of the outcome. And you can make all the right decisions and still have a heart attack. Yeah. Like that's, we need to take the pressure off of doing, this food and exercise thing 100%, because not all things can be prevented or treated with nutrition and exercise. They can be influenced, they can have an impact, they can affect your experience of health. And yes, in many circumstances, they can have a big impact on your risk, but they can't always prevent it 100%. And you should never become so focused on it that it's actually taking away from your health mentally and emotionally.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think that's the cost we don't talk about enough is, we do all of these things in the pursuit of health, and we're really sacrificing our health in a lot of ways. Right. And as you say, not guaranteeing the healthier outcome at the end of it. Right. So really good point. So then that brings up the next question is, if weight loss isn't the answer, and if we know it doesn't work, how can women start to feel more comfortable or good about ourselves in our changing body, that we don't know what's going on in it anymore?
So I have what I call the 4 pillars of intuitive nutrition in midlife. And so the first is based on understanding. I think that women have a fundamental misunderstanding of what's happening in midlife. And we know this from surveys where 50% of women are surprised that they're in perimenopause. And I use this analogy a lot too, that if 50% of women who became pregnant were surprised that they were pregnant, we would call it a public health failure.
Yeah.
Right. So, this age and stage, which can last up to a decade, is taking 50% of women by surprise. That's not okay. So we need to focus on the understanding of what's happening, why it's happening. And I think that gives us a little bit of it buys us some self-compassion, which is the second, pillar, that you cannot hate yourself into a body that you love. You can't try and shame and guilt yourself or motivate yourself by taping a picture of your younger self to the mirror. It just doesn't work. It's a terrible motivator. And it places all of the emphasis on how you feel about your body. And what we really want to focus on is how can I feel good in my body? How can I feel good living in my body? So understanding and self-compassion lead into attunement. And, attunement for women in midlife is often comes in like a superpower, because for many of us, we've spent the first few decades really focused on taking care of other people, nurturing careers, families, whatever it is, pets, doesn't have to be children. And, we're often very attuned to the needs of others, but we haven't had a lot of opportunity to become attuned to our own needs. And so learning to become attuned, what do I want? What do I need? What feels good? What doesn't? What do I enjoy? And then taking all of that and building in gentle nutrition, which is one of the principles of intuitive eating, because, food matters, just not in the way that we've been led to believe. And if we can undiet our beliefs, if we can undiet our programming, if we can come at a relationship with food and movement that is based on self-compassion and understanding and attunement, it's a lot easier to build in gentle nutrition as a way to support your health and how you feel in your body.
I love that. And I'm always talking about that interoceptive awareness, right? Like tuning into your own body's cues and picking up on what it is that our body's asking for and responding with compassion and kindness and body respect. And as you say, from there, the nutrition part of it, well, it is a lot gentler, but it also feels a lot easier because it's coming from a place of just internal knowing and not external rules and, having to diet and restrict and lose weight and all of that.
I always say that, nutrition isn't complicated.
Yeah.
If knowing what to eat was all we needed to know, I would be out of a job. My career, wouldn't exist, because you can Google what should someone eat, or what is, I don't want to use the terms good and bad, but it's pretty easy to figure out foods to have more often and foods to have less often. But it's, it's that $1 million question of, why do we have a hard time putting that into place without counting, tracking, controlling, measuring, accounting for? And it's because the control creates the craving. And that is the fundamental flaw in any restrictive eating pattern. It is the control that creates the craving. And the minute that you approach a relationship with food from a place of restriction, you will be left wanting. And, for so many women, it's all they've ever known. They grew up with restriction in their family. They were put on diets at an early age. They spent their teen years fighting the changes that were a normal part of puberty. They spent their 20s and 30s and early 40s, kind of constantly trying to get back to what they thought was maybe their best weight at 18, without ever realizing that, the side effect of dieting is that it makes you even more focused on food. And so food shouldn't be difficult. We have to make decisions about food every day, multiple times a day. It doesn't have to be hard, and it shouldn't be hard.
So when you say that nutrition matters, but not in the way that we've been led to believe, what do you mean by that? How should we approach nutrition?
So, and that's a really great question. And the way that I approach it is that I think that we can say that there are nutrition priorities for women in midlife that can influence their health that has absolutely nothing to do with weight. And so one of them that I like to talk about a lot is protein. And because protein is one of the things that I think a lot of women have already have some preconceived notions about, it's top of the diet culture hierarchy of like, safe foods and good foods. And so a lot of women have spent a lot of time trying to get a lot of protein.
Mm-hmm.
But as I know, and maybe and some of your listeners know, protein isn't really satisfying, right?
Right.
You can be starving and eat a chicken breast and you'll be more starving
Yeah.
because there's nothing satisfying about it. And so oftentimes I think when women, and I say women a lot, I really do mean like anybody who identifies as a woman or identifies as, someone with a uterus or however, this is really for anyone, but I default to saying women just because that's the people that I work with the most.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that for a lot of women, when they start an undieting journey, the first thing that they do is they just stop thinking about protein because they're so happy to not have to think about it all the time. So one of the gentle nutrition things that we bring back in is, the add-in technique. So lead with satisfaction is my first rule.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've asked yourself, what do I want? What sounds good? What tastes good? What's accessible? What can I have? Then you can add in protein. And so when I talk about gentle nutrition with protein, I talk about it in kind of a fun way. But again, I try and come up with ways that people don't have to count things, because I think as soon as we get into counting and tracking, for many people, it brings us right back into that diet culture mentality. So I talk about protein as a starring role, a supporting role, or an audience member. So if you have a starring role at most meals, so this is going to be your traditional serving of like meat or beans or, yogurt or something like that, or eggs, that's a great add-in. If you can't have a starring role, then maybe we try and add in a couple of supporting roles. So this would be things like cheese and nut butters or hummus or, those kinds of things. And then your audience members might be a sprinkling of seeds on a salad, some hemp hearts on toast or things like that. And so that's kind of one of the examples of how we can bring back in the conversation about nutrition and how food does matter. And without counting, without talking about numbers, without measuring, but just giving people the framework for how do I make these decisions by adding things in a way that just feels intuitive, like, oh, I'm building a balanced plate. I don't have a starring role. What are a couple supporting roles that I can throw in? So that's an example of how I approach that.
I love that whole analogy. I'm gonna maybe borrow that. Starring role, supporting role, audience member. I just thought of a whole bunch of ideas myself as I'm preparing my meals. Like, could I just throw in some audience members here with a few hemp seeds? Like that just seems so easy and doable.
Yeah.
Thank you for that tip.
And people will say to me all the time that they're like, oh my goodness, I'm like throwing pumpkin seeds on my peanut butter on my toast. And it feels so good to add something in, and especially if you want it and it's satisfying and it's accessible versus, oh, I don't have the time to make, a 4 egg white omelet, so I'm just going to have nothing. Like that's the all or nothing thinking, right? That so many people are coming from. Yes. And so, when we're talking about food, how can I get you to, undiet your beliefs around maybe certain aspects of food, while at the same time actually looking forward to rebuilding a relationship that feels more intuitive.
Mm-hmm. And I really, really love the idea of adding in, especially without all the all or nothing thinking, because what we hear everywhere else is restrict, right? And especially what I've noticed in my own independent research about perimenopause is restrict carbohydrates, no carbs. And I mean, that's not something I want to do, but do we need to avoid carbohydrates during this stage?
No. And and this is the thing is that, like most things around diet culture and nutrition, there really is very little evidence for any of these recommendations. And so the carbohydrate insulin model of, weight regulation has been disproven so many times. Insulin is inherently a satiety hormone. When we eat and our blood sugar, rises, insulin goes up, and that's part of the signaling that tells our brain that we have been fed. And, without it, you're probably going to feel hungry most of the time. And when I explain it that way, so many people will say, oh my goodness, that is why all I wanted to do was eat when I was doing low carb, because you never get any of that satiety hormone that has been signaled. So the carbohydrate insulin model has been disproven. But the other thing that I think is a little bit unique to women in midlife is that we know that restriction of any kind, but maybe even more so with restriction around carbohydrates, actually creates a stress response. So there's many studies which have found that cortisol levels are increased when people are following a low carbohydrate diet. When your stress levels are increased, your body is not going to prioritize reproduction. It is going to prioritize survival. And so when you're in perimenopause and your ovaries are already sputtering and your hormone levels are already all over the place, the last thing that you want to do is create any kind of additional stress. So that's the other big reason why low carbohydrate diets are not something I'd ever recommend. But the third reason is that carbohydrates really are important for helping to make serotonin. So we need carbohydrates to get as part of making serotonin, which is one of our neurotransmitters, which influences mood, but also influences melatonin. And studies have also found that when people consume carbohydrates, especially in the second half of their day with their evening meal, it reduces the amount of time needed to fall asleep. And again, when I explain this to people, they'll say, oh my goodness, yes, when I was trying to not have, a carbohydrate with my supper meal, I felt really wired before bed. And, they had a hard time winding down. And so there are so many reasons why carbohydrates need to be part of our life. It is carbohydrates provide glucose, which is, the fuel that our brain needs and prefers. So why would we ever want to make our body function and run on something less than its preferred fuel?
I mean, I sure don't know, but why
I talk a lot about carbohydrates.
This is music to my ears, let me tell you, because I mean, I don't want to restrict anything, but carbohydrates in particular, I definitely want to keep them as part of my life. So I don't know, maybe this is too big of a question to unwrap today, but like, why does everything say we need to avoid carbs then?
So one of the big reasons is that when you restrict carbohydrates, you will deprive the muscle cells of glycogen. And as a result, you will lose water weight. And so when people start reducing the amount of carbohydrates in their diet, they will feel like they're losing weight quickly. But as almost anybody who's experienced that will tell you, that stalls pretty quickly. And the other thing is that it hinders performance. So, a lot of people will say that they notice that they can't do the amount or types of movement that they would want to be doing. But again, I think so much of it comes from this flawed model of carbohydrate restriction. And there are, so many different studies which have looked at comparing low carb diets and keto diets to any other kind of diet, and they have never been shown to perform any differently, meaning that in the first 3 to 6 months, most people will lose some weight, but after 6 months, the weight starts to return. And by 12 months, there's virtually no difference. And many have regained the weight. That statistic that we've all heard that, somewhere in the 95% of diets fail, meaning that at 1, 2, and 5 years, there's very little difference in any of the diets. So
it really comes down to what we think we're doing in the name of health, but it's really just about weight loss, and not necessarily the most supportive decision for what's going on in our body at the moment.
Yeah. And a part of it too is, and it's interesting when you actually look at the research, and this is getting a little bit technical, but research often classifies low carbohydrates as like something in the range of 125 to 150 grams of carbohydrates.
Oh, that's far more than the keto.
Far more.
Yeah.
Right. And so, most of the time when I tell people that, they're like, well, that's what I was eating before. I'm like, yeah. And that's why, you haven't noticed much difference, is because you naturally gravitated towards a lower carbohydrate diet anyway. Because at the end of the day, I think the individual aspect of our health is that some people feel better with more and some people feel better with less. But if you're simply using weight loss as a metric of whether you should be eating more or less, you're not attuned to how your body feels when you're eating more or less. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I use the example of, if I'm in a really active phase, so we were fortunate and went to Switzerland this summer, and we did like 60 kilometers of hiking over 4 days.
Oh, wow.
I was waking up at 3 a.m. and needed to have a snack. So hungry, because it was like hard work. Versus, I'm recovering from knee surgery and haven't been all that active. My eating patterns have changed a lot as a result of attunement, because I'm just doing things differently and less.
Right.
And, it's that skill of attunement of, okay, my body needs more and I just need to respond to it, or my body needs less and I have permission to respond to it. But it's never about restriction. It's never about control. It's about attunement.
Oh, I love everything that you're saying. I'm learning so much. I want to circle back to one thing you said earlier on about how women love the idea of giving up dieting and embracing the intuitive lifestyle and this attunement, but the fear of weight gain is there and the hope of weight loss is still there. And there's this belief that if that happens, it'll seem like I've given up on myself.
Yeah.
So do you have any recommendations of how we can stop dieting without feeling like we've given up or let ourselves go?
Yeah. And it is a great question. And I think it is a much bigger question. But it absolutely is one that I have all the time as well. And so I say that for most people who have pursued weight loss, it has been in the hopes of reaching a size or shape that will allow them to feel good about their body. And that how they feel about their body is driving their self-image and self-esteem bus, as I call it. And that isn't a flexible or resilient sense of self, because the minute that your body changes, the minute that your genes don't fit the way you want them to, the minute that the number changes, you go into a panic, because all of a sudden it feels, like an urgent situation. But we need to normalize the fact that bodies change. We need to normalize the fact that your body changed in puberty. If you were pregnant, it changed in pregnancy. If you had more than one baby, it changed again. And it's going to change in perimenopause, and it's going to change again. And if you have been using weight as the primary, driver of your self-esteem bus, that is never going to feel, you're never going to land in a safe place. So that comes back to that pillar of understanding. So how can we undiet our beliefs about self-esteem and body image and body size and body shape, and really kind of develop a little bit more of that flexible sense of self? And, that's a term we call body neutrality. So how can I take that, body image out of the driver's seat and really just maybe have it, it's just a passenger on the bus, and how I feel about myself and how I go about my day isn't going to be influenced by what the scale says in the morning. Again, analogies, but if you have a bad hair day, you throw a hat on or you throw your hair up in a ponytail and you go about your day. You don't let it drive the bus, right? When you're 13, it might. I remember fixing my hair 8,000 times before leaving the door in the morning. But when you get to this place of midlife where you have enough life lived and experience to kind of say like, no one really cares about my hair, I don't have to worry about that so much. That's kind of where I want women to start thinking about their body image and shape, and just say, you have been programmed to believe that you can't feel good about yourself, that you can't be happy, that you can't be healthy unless you achieve this number or size. What if that isn't true? What if everything that you have done to pursue that has been based on a false belief? And I'm not saying it's easy to get there, but there's a moment of like where it clicks, and it's just like, okay, I feel safe to try that on for a little while. And as we try that on, and as we just kind of start to move through our days and life, not pursuing weight loss. We're not anti-weight loss, but we're not pursuing it because we're focused on what do I need to feel good in my body?
Mm-hmm.
And how does that help me feel better about myself and feel happier and healthier and just more confident as I go about my life?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the undieting of the beliefs, the pursuing body neutrality, and no longer letting how I feel about my body drive my self-esteem bus.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you said that, when we were 13, we could fix it and check our hair 13 times a day and that. And I mean, it's normal for these thoughts to come up about our hair, our face, our body, but we don't have to attach to them anymore, right?
Exactly.
We do have a choice about what we think. And I kind of think at this stage of life, aren't we all just kind of done with that?
Yeah, and we are. And this is the thing, is that in almost every aspect of midlife, women are done with worrying about what other people think. They're done with like wasting time on things, except we still have this programming that tells us
that we have to,
especially when it comes to our body size and shape.
Mm-hmm.
So there is definitely some deprogramming that has to happen there, but with it comes freedom. And that's, that food freedom and body confidence to no longer make decisions about food that are focused solely on trying to change your body shape. And so I always say too, that I don't ever make a goal of getting people to stop thinking or desiring weight loss, because I think that the reflex to desire weight loss is very ingrained in our culture. I think that it will still come up, but we're trying to develop some resiliency so that if that thought comes up, instead of immediately going into the diet cycle, instead of immediately starting to track, pulling up your old app or whatever it is, you can actually pause and reflect and say, why do I feel this way? What happened that made me feel bad about my body? That made me distrust what I was doing? And maybe how can I respond with more self-compassion and more attunement? And it's a simple shift, but when you can actually put it into practice, it's pretty powerful.
And it sure feels a lot kinder and a lot more accessible.
So much
doable.
kinder.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a couple final questions as we wrap up. And can you leave us with, I guess, one golden nugget? What is the most important thing that women in this stage of life can focus on or can do to support their physical and mental health?
One thing. I think that pursuing joyful movement in whatever way that you can. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously I know that you agree with that, but
I sure do.
Joyful movement and moving your body in ways that you enjoy as often as you can without the pressure of it resulting in a body change. And, because if we want evidence-based recommendations, movement is right up there, but it doesn't have to be CrossFit. Right. And, I tell women this all the time, like when you look at the data, walking is the most evidence-based, exercise, if we want to call it that. And that if you walk every day for 20 or 30 minutes, you will get all of the health benefits that you think you're going to get from killing it at the gym 3 times a week for an hour. But if you enjoy the walking more than the gym, you will want to do that more often, and you will turn to it for ways to manage stress and to help your health. And so I think that if there's one recommendation, it's absolutely around joyful movement. And again, part of that is the undieting process, because for many women, they have only ever pursued movement as part of the calorie in, calorie out equation.
Oh, absolutely.
And so when we can shift it to what's fun, what do you enjoy, what's accessible, what can you do most days? What do you want to try without ever having to count how many steps or how long you did it or how many calories you burned? It becomes joyful.
You're speaking my language. This is what we talk about here all day long. And, I'm big on motivation, and we know that when we like what we're doing and we feel like we're good at it and we feel the benefits of it outside of what it does on the scale, but like actually benefits our body, we're going to want to do more of it.
Yeah.
Right. And as well as everything that you said about making peace with food and adding things in, undieting your mindset, and that body acceptance work, like movement is a great way, I believe, to support our bodies and care for our bodies at any stage of life, but particularly this one. Mm-hmm. So I always ask my guests, which ties in really well to what you just said, what does joyful movement mean to you?
I think it comes back down to, I really harp on this idea of like feeling what you feel in your body versus about your body. And, when joyful movement for me is just when I'm present in how my body is moving. And I'm just, I'm recovering from knee surgery where I was on like crutches and couldn't weight bear for 6 weeks. And this is the last couple of days are literally the first time that I've been able to walk without crutches. And I walked like 150 meters to the post office today. And I have to I'm relearning how to walk. So I have to think about every step and heel to toe and heel to toe, but it was all joyful because I was in my body and I was moving independently. And something that I had felt like that was really not accessible to me. So I think that when we're focused on how we feel in our bodies, doing whatever it is that we're doing, that's where the joy is for me.
Yes. And what I'm hearing as you relay that story is a whole lot of gratitude for what your body can do. And I always say gratitude is the great gateway to joy.
Yes,
so when
absolutely.
We can be present and be thankful that my body was able to carry me 150 meters. Someone else might not think that's very much, but that's amazing to you at this stage and brings joy. So that's a great story.
I spent 6 weeks going up and down the stairs on my butt because we live in the Netherlands, and Dutch houses. If anyone has been in Dutch houses, they have very narrow stairs and very narrow stair treads. And so there was no way I was attempting those on crutches. And so for the last few days, I've been able to go up and down without having to get on my butt and scooch up. And it's like an appreciation for like this simple thing of just going up and down the stairs,
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective on what brings you joy and movement. This has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to share so generously with my community.
Thank you. It's been great. I loved it.
Is there anything else that's pressing on your heart that you wanted to bring up today?
No, just that I love all the conversations that involve any kind of, bringing women into a space that feels safe to explore a new relationship with food and movement. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, hey, it's been absolutely my pleasure. And I know that our audience is going to want to keep in touch because you share so much value. So please tell us how they can connect with you.
So the best place will be Instagram. It's kind of where I hang out the most, at menopause.nutritionist, and my group programs or any of my other kind of programs on offer will be in the link in my bio. I often will do workshops or webinars, and I have a group program a small group program that runs 3 times a year. And that's always a great place for women who need to kind of deep dive into this work as they journey into midlife.
Great. And you have a podcast as well, right?
Yes. The podcast is the Midlife Feast, where we talk about all this kind of stuff. And also, just kind of the experience of how do we feast on midlife and make the most of it.
It's an amazing podcast. I definitely think you should jump right off over here and go over to Jenn's podcast and hit the subscribe button. So, Jenn, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the Power in Motion podcast today. If you love what you're learning here, then I invite you to take the next step of embodying these concepts into your own life so that you can live your healthiest, happiest life and never again feel held back by your body. Coaching is the fastest, most efficient pathway to taking what you know in your head to actually applying it and seeing results. Whether you're looking to make changes around movement, food, body image, or all three, I'm here to help you nurture a kind, respectful, and trusting relationship with your body so you can feel your very best. Click the link in the show notes to book a free consultation, and together we'll uncover what's getting in the way of you having the results you want. You'll leave this call knowing exactly what you need to work on And together we'll explore whether one of my coaching offers is a good fit for you. I can't wait to meet you.